Thank you all for participating in this panel discussion. We would like to have you introduce yourself first. Jillian, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm Jillian. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Faculty of Forestry, and I've been a sessional lecturer in the School of Engineering as well as a TA, and I've TA'd in the Faculty of Arts and Science and Forestry as well for the past 3 years.
Hi, my name is John. I'm from Department of Biochemistry, fifth-year PhD candidate. I'm a lead TA as well as a sessional lecturer for my own department. I've been teaching for the past 3 years.
Hello everyone, I am Ting. I am a recent graduate from Department of Physical and Environmental Science at U of T, and I have also been a TA in this department for 5 years.
I'm Sarah. I'm a PhD candidate in the Earth Sciences department. I've been TAing for the Earth Sciences as well as the Astronomy department, and I'm the lead writing TA for the Earth Sciences department.
Hi everyone, my name is Kang Bin. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology, and I have been a TA for fourth-year systemic pharmacology for the past 5 years, mostly leading small group discussions.
So all of you have been a TA for several years, and you either taught or were involved in a laboratory or practical sessions. We all know that laboratory or practical sessions can be quite challenging and different from other sessions. So today, we would like to explore some solutions using multimedia. Would you like to share your common challenges that can be addressed by multimedia tools or resources?
Yeah, I can start. So I think the first, the common thing is unfamiliarity from both students and the first-time TA. For example, students sometimes read the instructions or lab manuals, but it's a different thing when they see how the experiment's actually been performed or the usage of equipment. And similarly for the first-time TA, they may have the same struggles even though they know the steps for the experiment, but they're not familiar with the lab setup or the operation of the machines, equipments, and so I think multimedia provide a really good platform to effectively demonstrate, how are the experimental flows and how what are the operations of equipments, how are they done, and stuff like that. I think also multimedia also provide a great tool to engage students as well.
It can also really help when you're under tight timelines. So maybe if you can give students a video or some other form of multimedia ahead of time or in the moment, it can really help to make things run a little bit smoother and take a little bit of the stress off.
In our department, we usually use a lot of animal models to perform experiments, and usually it's actually quite expensive. And when we perform the experiments as TAs, we usually have a group of students gather around us, so not everyone would have a really good angle to see what we're exactly doing. So I think multimedia can really help us to keep kind of like a 360-degree angle for all the students to be able to see. So if we can have like a camera rolling on the side and the student can just see like the live video feed of the exact experiment, and then that will really help them to understand the procedures and the experimental conditions of the studies.
That's fantastic. And Sarah, do you have other benefits that you can add on to it?
I've seen the benefits of it mostly in first-year labs when you have, especially for English language learners, having multimedia makes it a lot easier when they walk into a lab. They might not necessarily know, they can't match the name of the instrument to the actual word or the tool, so having some sort of multimedia gives them sort of a preview before they walk into the lab and try to do something for the first time.
I totally agree with it. And not only for the ELL students, but also for native students, because the scientific terms or some procedures can be different from what you usually use in daily life. And providing some videos or images can be very helpful for the students to understand the concept.
Another benefit in my own work is because a lot of the sites that I work at are remote, so a lot of times the students, they're not going to have the opportunity to actually see what these places look like. And so using multimedia, things like virtual tours or videos or photos have really helped me to engage the students and bring them to a place that they can't actually go to physically.
I also agree with Jillian because I teach in biochemistry. We discuss protein structure and function. These are the tiny things you can't even see through a microscope. So when we have these discussions, it could be very difficult and abstract for students. So what I decided to do is to employ, for example, virtual reality so they can we can actually look at these protein structures, and then we can almost see and touch these molecules, and so students can better understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, Jelling and Sean give very good examples, and I would like to ask the rest to share your experience.
So for most of our experiments, they're actually quite complex, and there are like multiple steps, and because we use animal models most of the time, so it's for most of the time it's really hard to make mistakes, and we can't really afford to make mistakes, because once we sacrifice one animal, we won't be able to have another one. So having maybe a video or a demo video online so the students can access to it, and then they can review the video before coming to the lab, that will really help them prepare for the experiment.
I'm a visual learner, so I try to promote use of sketches instead of having a lot of words. I try to encourage them to draw a sketch to summarize something, as well as like on the subway, I see a lot of people reading, but I get motion sickness, so I promote podcasts. I try to suggest some podcasts like Friday Science, things you should know. If I can relate it to the topic, I'll suggest it to them so that they can listen to a podcast on the subway and learn about it. And sometimes I get to write them blog posts instead of a lab report or like a little essay. I get them to write it as a blog using social media. It's really popular. Everyone's on their phone and computer all the time anyways. So let's try to bring that into our labs and tutorials.
Yeah, not only videos or audios or even some social mediums. Sometimes a very simple image can explain a lot of things. It worth 1,000 of words. For example, like last year I taught a course which explains what is colony, but students had a lot of questions in my office hours to ask what is colony, how to count colonies. And this year I suggest the course instructor to use one of the images to explain the concept. And I find there was a large decline of students asking the same question in my office hour.
I also have the same experience. When we have a lot of students in biochemistry, they have troubles of doing a lot of math questions, and so that's also reflected on their exam. So when I had that information, I try to do a really in-class live demonstration of how to derive certain equations, and then also screen tape the session so that I can have that as a video format to upload on portal, and so students can have access to these kind of videos all the time, because we all know it's different when you read a textbook of how to derive equation, when you see live how to derive equations. So that's very convenient for students as well.
Yeah, so like for other TAs, if this is the second time that you are teaching, you might use some multimedia to address some of the challenges that you experience for your first time teaching. I think not only you guys as a TA experience the difference after using these multimedias, but also students might express their benefit, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the feedback you have gotten from the students?
For me, one of the biggest feedbacks is that they learn a new technique and they have a tool to take away from that lab or from that tutorial that goes beyond the course content. So it's something that they can use in their other courses to help them study for exams or just in real life as well. It's a new tool or a new skill that they've gained.
I find that they're really interested in the material. They also really appreciate the time that you've put in as a TA to find new ways of teaching or delivering the information to them in a way that maybe relates to them better than the traditional lecture styles.
Yeah, so general students always reflected on the fact that it's very interesting. They keep their attention. You engage them, as well as from talking to students, the questions they come up with, I feel you can see that these questions are really thought out because they really invested in these concepts and they studied, and then they have these questions that came to you. So yeah,
my students generally really like it, and I guess the biggest benefit they have is they can actually go back and revisit the video so they can discuss it and like what they did wrong last time in the experiment, and then they can discuss with their classmates, and then they can even review the experiment before the exam, so that really help them to prepare for the final exam.
Having shared your own experience, would you advise other TAs or suggest some multiple tools for other TAs to use, like in your department or in your subject?
So for me, as I mentioned earlier, I work in remote sites. A lot of those sites, being forestry, are clear cuts. And so a lot of people have never seen a clear cut. Living in Toronto, you're never going to really get a chance to see one. So I use the virtual tours, which are kind of like a 360-degree image of the area where you can move around and look around. And it kind of gives the students a better idea of what these sites look like and exposes them to something in a different way than just speaking about it, and then also by how just a photo might expose them.
So I also highly recommend the fellow TAs to use multimedia tools, particularly I think for TAs who are teaching the first year, second year classes. We often dump a lot of facts on students, and students lose the purpose of like, why am I studying this? And so I think using multimedia by means of both the diverse content and the rich format, you can spice up the class a little bit, and you can certainly bring a lot of real life examples and case studies into the classrooms to give the students a sense of relevance of why they're learning these materials.
And for me, I think sort of to go on Jillian's point, in the Earth Sciences department, we have a lot of field courses as well. And using Google Earth is a really good tool before they actually get to the field and get on site. They can sort of get a visual understanding of where they're about to go. But we also do planetary science and remote sensing, so Google Earth of Moon. So looking at other planets and other videos and photos, it makes a huge difference for them.
And kind of similar to Jillian's point, and we in our department we have some online courses. So I would advise TA to try to create some online forums. So for students who are distant or they commute from far, they can discuss some questions or materials online with each other that can help them learn without actually physically traveling to the university.
And in my department, it's environmental science. It covers a lot of interesting topics, and sometimes the time is restrained for students to share the interesting topics and to facilitate the discussion. So I think in my department, I suggest some TAs to using some blogs, which students can leave the comments and TAs can interact with them, and students can also interact with each other, which will provide a larger field for them to explore. And while we are using multimedia to address a lot of challenges that existing in teaching laboratory or practical session, we also experience a lot of difficulties or challenges, right? Would you like to share that?
So the thing I fear the most is obviously the tech or the equipment that I want to use is not present in the classroom. So what I do if I was assigned to a new classroom, I usually scout out that classroom way before. So check out what equipments they have. If they have, are they working in a proper way? And then I'll test it before the class starts. Just make sure all the multimedia tools I have are working. Just make sure there's no funny business with all these technologies and things.
Right.
I guess what most TAs fear is time. It does take a little bit of time to come up with new ways to engage students and bring a new method of learning and teaching into classrooms. But I think it's worth it. You might invest a little bit time ahead of your tutorial or lab, but it makes things go a lot smoother. The questions that you get after are a bit reduced. And when you get more TAs to do similar things in the department, then you have more material ready that you can share with one another.
Yeah, not only the time for preparation, I think it's also the time during the class. While you are using this multimedia resources, it might generate discussions among students. And then it's hard to control the time, how much you are going to, maybe it will go over.
I guess another challenge I can think of is accessibility. So some students might not have access to the material. So for example, if it's a video online and if the bandwidth is really small, and then they might not be able to view the video online smoothly. And sometimes they might not even have a computer in some space where they need to study. So I think sometimes they might have difficulty accessing the multimedia online.
So similar to what Sarah had said, sometimes we can think of a lot of multimedia tools that we might like to use, but they don't actually exist. And so for me, if I wanted to show a 360-degree tour of a clear cut, that might not be available online. And so what I ended up doing was creating one myself. This took a little bit of thought ahead of time on my part because I was able to take these images at my site in the summer and then show them in the course in the fall. So it may take a little bit of extra time, but these are things that you can add to your portfolio if you're interested in staying in academia. It can also be used in other areas of your work, so showing it at a committee meeting or things like that.
Thank you all for a great discussion. And now let's land on our closing mark. So let us all use one sentence to summarize the highlight or the takeaway that you have from this discussion.
For me, I think it's just a great way to add interest to the classroom and to engage your students in alternative ways of learning.
I think for our discussion certainly touched on the applicability of multimedia, certainly also broadened the definition of traditional multimedia beyond just TV and video, also touched on social media, blogs, various different softwares, for example. So these are all possibilities that we can use in our future classrooms.
I guess that the time investment is worth it. Your students are going to be more engaged. They're going to take away more than just the course content, and you get to add more to your own teaching portfolio.
Yeah, just to respond to Sean's comment on social media, I think multimedia can increase the students' interest because nowadays everyone uses social media. So by us using it as TAs, we can increase the interest and we can increase the involvement as well. So that would be really beneficial, especially for students who are taking online courses.
On top of everyone's summary, I just want to add that it's not only effective for TAs to prepare for the session, but also it's effective for students to learn.